And welcome back. And you're joining us, well, back here in the cupboard with myself, Gareth, and my co-host, Aaron, in the Natural History Cupboard. But this week we have got a very special guest. We are doing probably the most requested person to be interviewed. You were saying, Aaron?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. Yeah.
Joining us very graciously is Dr. Dean Lomax. Welcome.
Oh, pleasure to be here. It's very humbling to hear that I'm the most requested person to be on the show. So yeah, it's great to make this happen.
By far the most request.
Is that right? That's
The
very
other
sweet.
request we get is that we should shut up. But
Yeah.
so, well, what we're going to do is our usual sort of interview format. We'll take you through some questions that we've basically posed you, and well, feel free to tell us any and all things that you want. But Aaron, I think you are going to start things off with our first question.
Yes, I kick things off. I just thought for those of you who those of our listeners who might not know about you, and also just to kind of freak out the ones that do know you, would you tell us a little bit about yourself? Because you didn't take the more stereotypically kind of academic route into paleontology, and I think that's important. Neither did I when I got into zookeeping. And I think it's important people know that there are other options out there. So I'd love to know when and how your interest in the natural world first kind of manifested, and what was it about paleontology that specifically that spoke to you?
That's a great question, and there's I could give you a super long answer, and we probably could be here for a few hours, which we could do that. We could play the long game, but I'm going to try and keep it streamlined. So I'll give you kind of a short, medium answer to that. So much like I'm sure many of the listeners listening, to the podcast will be very familiar, very interested, like I'm sure the two of you as well, interested in fossils, dinosaurs, natural history, kind of literally everything in terms of paleontology. So reading books, watching documentaries, movies, obviously Jurassic Park, Land Before Time, all that sort of stuff. As I got to my kind of teenage years, I still had that passion and just wanted to be a paleontologist from as far back as I can remember. And so I was kind of like, well, how do I go into paleontology professionally? It's not something that, as children, you kind of think it's kind of in the leagues of being an astronaut or something, right? It seems like very unrealistic. And for somebody who was born and bred in Doncaster in South Yorkshire, there was very, very few opportunities for a would-be paleontologist. And so growing up, despite collecting fossils and doing all that stuff, I just got to the point where it's like, yeah, in my teen years, in school, I wasn't very good academically. You'll probably laugh at it, but I actually failed science at GCSE, which is crazy considering I now have a PhD in science. But as a result, I couldn't go on to do A-level science. So I ended up doing, if I get it correct, I think it was English and was it graphic design, I think, for A levels, and failed both of them. And so I just didn't have the grades, and I definitely didn't have the finances either. I come from a very poor area of Doncaster as well. We didn't really grow up with much money in terms of our family. Kind of struggled to pay the bills each month, that kind of family. And so we had a real struggle. We had nobody in the family immediate family who'd been to university or anything like that. And so when I finally got to the age of kind of 17, 18 and was like, well, I still really want to be a paleontologist. That's where I've kind of not put all my eggs in one basket, but I kind of had done that because that's what I wanted to do. That's where my absolute love was and passion. So I then looked realistically at the prospects of getting into paleo, and it all just seemed like you've got to go to university was kind of the main thing that I'd had back from feedback from either professionals in the field or people who had been kind of wanting to go into paleontology, or if you looked online back at that point, or even some of the books that you might find with people's kind of backstories. But there was also a few people who kind of hadn't gone that direct university academic route. And so, at the age of 18, I'd actually ended up, I said could be quite long, but this is a shortened version, believe me. I ended up speaking to a supply teacher who's a fantastic man. His name's Renato Bonacorsi, Mr. Bonacorsi, who I know he still follows some of my social medias. And I'm still in touch with him. So if you do listen to this, hey, Renato. But he actually, by chance, he took a couple of lessons, and he was kind of brought in on at the last, literally, it was like the last month or something of school for me. So, literally, I guess I'd have been late 17 or early 18 at that point. But basically, he was kind of given this task to sit down with children who didn't really have any career prospects and kind of go around the class and kind of say, "Oh, what do you want to be?" So I said, I want to be a paleontologist, and Renato, Mr. Bonacorsi, was like, "What the hell is that?" And so you kind of sat down, gave him that kind of spiel, "Oh, paleontology," kind of let my passion run free and run through and free, and he said, "Well, what are you going to do if you can't go to university?" So I said, "Oh, there's prospects of going to America, for example. America is one of the places in the world." Despite the fact that obviously paleontology all began here in the British Isles, etc., but America, obviously, as you both know, full well, is great for dinosaurs, proper major excavations, things like the Morrison Formation, Hell Creek Formation, that sort of thing. And so I ended up putting together a letter with him and reaching out to a whole bunch of societies and universities and things in the States. And we actually had a couple of museums come back and say they'd potentially be interested in having me go and volunteer. And after kind of working out which one looked like it'd be the best, it ended up being a museum called the Wyoming Dinosaur Center. And so I'll kind of speed up that kind of story now because basically I ended up having to sell a bunch of my possessions and also work like three jobs that I really hated. You imagine this as a late 17, early 18-year-old, kind of working on the bar, working delivery, and kind of selling literally my possessions, including which I can see behind you on the shelf, some Star Wars stuff. So I actually sold my childhood Star Wars collection, which is
Oh,
wild. And yeah, and I actually also in that I sold some of my, well, in fact, all of my Transformers, like kind of 1980s collection, and none of this stuff really was pristine either. It was mostly the good stuff was kind of things that I had for like special birthdays and kind of Christmases. But most of it I'd picked up at car boots and that, as a kind of 12, 13-year old interest in that sort of stuff. But yeah, sold all of that. And then kind of fast forward a little bit, I ended up going out to volunteer at the Wyoming Dinosaur Center for almost 4 months. And that literally became the kind of dinosaur backbone to my career. It allowed me to be around real academics, that being students who are doing their undergrads, masters, PhDs, around professors in paleontology, just in an environment where, although I had friends and family who were supportive of me, I never been around kind of that sort of thing where you find your people. And I
Yeah, yeah.
was able to have a conversation about whether it was something like Mary Anning's ichthyosaurs or plesiosaurs or something, and people could actually respond to me and say, "Oh, did you know this?" And it's like, "Wow, cool! This is really awesome." And so it kind of just really solidified my kind of thoughts and feelings of wanting to go into paleontology kind of professionally. And so after that 4 month long volunteer trip, it really revolutionized my kind of way of and thinking in paleontology and got my foot on the ladder. And so I then began volunteering at my local museum in Doncaster. It was then called Doncaster Museum and Art Gallery, and kind of one thing and another, volunteering, doing a couple of things here, all the while still working the odd jobs, delivery and things. But then very gradually over that trip, which I should say was 2008. So that's what, 18 years ago or something. So that's half my life ago. And so that was just genuinely a career defining trip, and meeting various paleontologists, it opened up so many different doors, and I had to then begin to really work my arse off. And I even began writing pretty much that after coming back that summer. I ended up writing my first academic paper. I had no clue what I was doing. I had never even heard of papers. They kind of were thinking kind of like newspapers, not academic papers. So I had no clue. And so that really helped me get my foot on the ladder, meeting all these professionals. And I ended up working then for several years, volunteering at Doncaster Museum and other places, getting the odd job here and there in paleontology, a few consultancy things, and writing a bunch of academic papers, which were published. The first of mine was published in 2010, which actually was on an ichthyosaur, which we'll talk about ichthyosaurs, I'm sure, shortly. But that kind of came off the back of this volunteering at Doncaster. And then I kind of forego doing an undergrad because I'd ended up writing, I think it must have been somewhere like 10 academic papers and two books. And then I became affiliated with the University of Manchester in, I think, was it 2011, maybe 2011, and then ended up doing a master's, or maybe it was 2013. Anyway, did a master's right off the bat without doing an undergrad, which I completed in 2015, and then did a PhD in 2019, all the while without ever doing an undergrad degree. And that came off the back of finding ultimately my way into paleontology and the sciences,
Yeah.
which obviously is quite unheard of. It's quite rare, but it kind of comes down to, as I always say, is having that passion for your subject, the passion and the drive.
Yeah,
Absolutely, yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, as I say, kind of long story short to a point. I could tell that story. I've played it over so long, and it only feels like yesterday that I was first in Wyoming. You know, that was also the first time away from family properly and things, and it feels like yesterday. But to think and say out loud that's 18 years ago is scary. That this summer will be 18 years that I've been working, you know, professionally in paleontology.
That's amazing, mate.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite a long time. But then you think about it in terms of just your own recent history. I mean, 18 years ago, I think that's roughly a little bit before when I started zookeeping. That's even sort of chunk of time. It'd be about the same time for you as well.
Probably similarly,
Yeah,
you look back on that chunk of time and instead of thinking like, where did it go? You think, wow,
Yeah.
what a wonderful collection of experiences,
yeah,
memories. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah,
That's
no, I
really cool.
appreciate it. Yeah, and I always come back to it as well because I have such fond memories of that trip in particular, and I did end up going back. I did end up going back to Wyoming and the Wyoming Dinosaur Center in 2009 as well, and I've worked a lot with them over the years now. I've led a couple of excavations there and other things and done field work in kind of nearby Colorado, Montana and things too over the years. But it really did just open my eyes to the field of paleontology, but also, and I think it's important for listeners too, it really broadened my horizon. So you imagine as a young lad growing up in Doncaster, if we were very lucky as kids, I think we went on maybe one or two family holidays to somewhere in Spain, as you do kind of Tenerife or something
Mm,
like
yeah.
that. And so being that 18-year-old and going out to somewhere like Wyoming, taking three planes and going out to a state where deer outpopulate humans, and that your accent is really exotic to people there who they just want to hear you talk and things, and it's bizarre as somebody as an 18-year-old coming from Doncaster is like, oh, I've just, you know, there's a Yorkshire accent. It's kind of you kind of, it's weird, but you kind of become a somebody, but also it really helped you to get that kind of gain that kind of life experience too. And I think a lot of people kind of don't. Yeah, I found it over the years that there are a lot of people who kind of don't necessarily get that. And I think,
Yeah.
especially in the sciences in paleontology, I've had people come to me, and I think when I've given advice, and I've had students, volunteers, whatever, come and kind of work with me, and I've given them kind of pointers to go out to America and places like that, or whether it's in Europe, and just gain that level of experience because it puts you out there on your own, and you become, I guess, to a point where you know you kind of you have to fend for yourself, right? You've got to cook for yourself, you've got to learn to cook, you all those sorts of things, all the while chasing your dream. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a very huge turning point in my, you know, professional career, and also just the way in which I really got into paleontology. And it's nice. I've had so many people over the years say how inspiring it is, and so it's yeah, a very very unconventional career within the sciences of and within paleontology.
Oh. It's also weird that Wyoming can kind of claim you. Like you say, you're Doncaster born and bred, but
Yeah.
Wyoming is kind of what gave you your
origin story.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's right. Yeah, yeah,
That's really
exactly.
cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. In
Mm.
fact, when I went back a couple of years ago, I went back actually, it was actually 15-year anniversary to Wyoming to actually lead the first ever Wyoming's Jurassic Fest, which again was a huge privilege to do that. And it was basically a 2 day festival, and it was including various speakers, me as the keynote speaker, and me leading a dig over the 2 days with various teams and members of the public and things. And I remember giving a talk a bit about, again, my background, so the origin story. And then I said, you know, I may have been born in the UK, but I guess I was made in Wyoming, made there in a place, which is a really funny thing. It's also a magical sounding town called Thermopolis, where Wyoming Dinosaur
Oh,
Center is. So
well,
yeah,
That's
it's pretty
that's
cool.
cool.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
That's good.
yeah,
So you've already mentioned ichthyosaurs, how
for sure.
they've played a huge role in your career. Was this deliberate from the outset, or something that you discovered a love for later on as a species or a group of reptiles?
So more of the latter, I'd say, Gareth. So again, inevitably growing up reading books and learning a lot about our kind of rich paleontological history, of course, dinosaurs being found here, named here, kind of, I always say, kind of they're a British invention, dinosaurs, and we have such a rich history of more than 70, 80, maybe 90 species known here that not so many people are aware of, but we do have a rich record. And of course, we're very famous in the British Isles for marine reptiles. And so ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, and crocs and things too. But ichthyosaurs, I'd learned a lot about kind of growing up. And obviously, people like Mary Anning, she was a real hero of mine growing up. And I read a lot about Mary. And so I kind of had that in the back of my mind, but I never actually intentionally went into paleontology thinking, hey, ichthyosaurs are going to be my thing. It was really serendipitous. And this is why it's so important for me to kind of have that unpack that story in Wyoming, because it was such a profound kind of trip, because it opened up so many different doors, but one in particular is that's where ultimately the story of me with ichthyosaurs came from, and that's simply because one of the museum members of staff is a guy called Bill Wall. He was a marine reptile expert, and he published on ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs and other things too. But
Yeah.
ichthyosaurs were his kind of first love, and just by sheer coincidence, traveling from New York for basically about a week's time was a professor, Professor Judy Massere, and I remember speaking to some of the interns and some of the staff, and they were kind of like, "Oh my God, Professor Massere is going to be here," and I'm like, "Who the hell's Professor Massere?" I have no idea. I'm not in that academic world, right? So I'm like, "Who is that?" And they're like, "Oh, she's like the person on marine reptiles, and she's published so many pivotal studies and things." And I was like, "Oh, cool." So anyway, I was like, I've got to meet Professor Messere. And when she came into the museum, Bill introduced me, and I was like, oh hey, so nice to meet you. And Bill said, hey, Dean, we're actually going to go and dig up a pliosaur this weekend. Do you want to come? I'm like, yeah, obviously I want to come and dig up a pliosaur. So I went
That's
out
a
for
good weekend invitation.
exactly. And then that was another thing. I was there volunteering at the museum, and I was only kind of scheduled to do Monday to Friday, but I would be there come rain or shine the weekend as well, because I saw it as my one big shot, right? I needed to just gain as much experience and volunteer and meet as many people as possible. And so going on this trip, we ended up digging up this pliosaur, a thing called Megalnosaurus rex, which lived during the very late Jurassic in the Oxfordian time, which is kind of equivalent to things like Pliosaurus lipleurodon, what we find in the British Isles. And basically, yeah, it's big pliosaur, probably about a 7 meter animal, something like that. And whilst excavating it, Judy, Bill, and myself and others, we were talking about ichthyosaurs, and it was really the two of them who really ignited my interest again. And they talked so passionately about research on ichthyosaurs, and I said, oh well, when I go back to the UK, maybe there's some opportunity. And so, lo and behold, after I returned from that trip, now kind of supercharged with more ichthyosaur information and stuff, I went and began volunteering at my local museum, Doncaster. And this is again is just such a touch of serendipity where I should point out there is no paleontologist at this museum. The last paleontologist, a guy called Henry Culpin, which I actually did a study on, Henry, he died in 1913, so that was the last paleontologist, and then yeah, and the last geologist, she retired in like the 1980s. So when I began volunteering, I'd been to the museum as a kid, right? And I'd never seen any fossils on display. In fact, they only had, I think, the last time I was there as a 17, 18-year-old was a mammoth and a woolly rhino tooth, and they actually had them both mixed up. So I was like, oh, that's wrong. And I made a good impression on the then curator of archaeology, a chap called Peter Robinson. And so anyway, so when I came back from Wyoming, I met up again with Peter, and he offered me the opportunity to volunteer. And he said, hey, Dean, we have a few fossils, a small fossil collection. So I said, oh, great, maybe we could do a little display. Turns out they had no clue what they had, and they must have had somewhere in the region of about 12 to 15,000 fossils. And so you
Whoa.
imagine, yeah, right. So you imagine me coming back and seeing this collection and thinking, wow, what have they got hiding in here? And of
Just a
course,
few.
it's just a few, right? And just so happens, and this is again, this is literally right off the back of this trip to Wyoming. First day officially volunteering, they showed me some of the collection, and the education officer said, "Hey, Dean, we have a fantastic replica of an ichthyosaur that you might want to see." So I went behind the scenes in the museum into the education department, and he pops off this lid, and his name was Alan. Alan and Peter are looking at this ichthyosaur and saying it's a replica, and I'm looking at it thinking, that is not a replica, that's real. And so I immediately said, that's real. And they both said, oh, it can't be real. And I said, well, why? And they said, oh, well, we let children do brass rubbings of the ribs.
Oh,
So I kind of pulled a face and and said don't do that. And there was also crayon and things on there, and kind of to kind of streamline this a little bit, they were very supportive, and it wasn't necessarily a case of, oh, you're an 18-year-old, what you're talking about. There may be some of that from other members of staff at the museum, because it was quite a big deal, as you can imagine, when I'd said no, this is real. But actually, yeah, lo and behold, I had it identified by two other people who confirmed, yep, Dean was right. It is real. And right at that point, there was this dark mass between its ribs, and I said, "Oh, maybe it's got its last meal preserved or something." And I had a couple of conversations with people, that including those two people who I mentioned who had confirmed it. And yeah, that actually turned out to form my first academic paper, which I'd reached out to. You can imagine again the serendipity. I reached out to Judy and Bill literally that evening, like, I found an ichthyosaur. It looks like it's got stomach contents in my local museum. And so they replied to say, I remember Professor Mosseri Judy replied to say, well, Dean, the last study of an early Jurassic ichthyosaur from the UK with stomach contents was 1968, and nobody had done anything since. And I'm just there thinking, what weird ichthyosaur stars have aligned here for me to meet Judy and Bill, these leading marine reptile experts, and then come home to my hometown museum where apparently there was no fossils, and there's this pretty much complete ichthyosaur that was thought to be a replica, and it's real. Like, what's the chance of that? All at 18 years old, going through this process. So, yeah, that's where my real kind of start in ichthyosaurs came from, and kind of never looked back since then. Of course, I've now published probably in the region of maybe, if I work it out, maybe somewhere like 60 academic papers, I think, on ichthyosaurs now. And also, obviously, I vary my research too. I work on other stuff, plesiosaurs, dinosaurs, plants, eurypterids, and other things. People look at my research, like, oh, didn't know you worked on ammonites and things too. But yeah, but ichthyosaurs are my, I guess, real expertise. And it's kind and humbling to be recognized as one of the world's leading ichthyosaur experts now.
that's pretty amazing.
Really cool.
I mean, from the limited places that I've been fossil hunting, the first uh, vertebrate fossil that I ever found, which I actually thought at the time was a turtle rib from Folkestone, um, many years ago now. I can't remember. I had it identified, but it turned out it was actually the ribs of a very small ichthyosaur, like a baby, which was quite nice. They're one of, I think, the like the best finds. I think, like vertebrate finds, and the likes of us that probably just get to go to the beach and do things and not go on massively serious digs or anything, are likely to find, I suppose. Is
They're certainly, they've got to be like top three historically of like the coolest kind of fauna of the British Isles,
definitely
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the most, like I said, the single most impressive bone that I've got is an ichthyosaur bone. So that's it. That's it for me.
Very
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, I get it. I get it. And that's the thing. And as I kind of alluded to a little bit too, is on the world stage as well. And not just for Mary Anning, but of course a big part that Mary played in this, but with other people who've collected them over the years. But ichthyosaurs and the British Isles, Britain, UK, whatever, is they're synonymous. People know ichthyosaurs are from here, and so it doesn't surprise me, Gareth, that yeah, you found a piece of that. I think if you're lucky to find a vertebrate, especially from the Mesozoic, and if it's like early Jurassic stuff, chances are, if it's a marine kind of environment, yeah, you're going to find an ichthyosaur, a vertebra, or a piece of rib or something like yourself. So yeah, very cool.
Yeah. Mm.
So sticking with the theme of ichthyosaurs for a moment,
Mhm.
the Rutland sea dragon. So discovered
Yeah.
in 2021, you're called to the scene along with its finder. You're one of the first sets of eyes to lock onto this behemoth in about 180 million years, I think. How did that feel, and what was the excavation process like?
Yeah, it's definitely up there as one of the highlights of my career of being the person to ultimately orchestrate and lead the dig and when it's funny, I get a lot of emails, as you might imagine, and a lot of messages and comments and things on social media from people being like, "Oh, I found a dinosaur, I found a fossil," and I'd say 90% of the time it isn't. Of course, it's an odd-shaped rock. It's a good pseudo fossil sort of thing, and you never want to deter people's enthusiasm, of course, so you have to let them down gently. And I remember sitting at my desk in the office and just up pops this email about a Rutland find, question mark, dinosaur or something. And I looked at it and I scrolled down, looked at the email chain. It was literally found the day before I got received this email. And I should point out it's found by this chap Joe Davis, who's a really wonderful chap. He works at the Rutland Water Nature Reserve. Yeah, really nice guy. And Joe had kind of informed he did the right thing. He informed the local council, and ultimately this email trickled down to me and another good friend of mine, another marine reptile expert, Dr. Mark Evans, who lived more locally to the site than we lived in, or still lives in Leicester or Leicestershire. And when I clicked the attachments, because it didn't come up where you could see a little snippet, I just reading this through this email, and it was like, oh, I found a dinosaur, and so I was like, oh, not again. Clicked it, and then up popped this image of, if I remember rightly, something like a string of maybe 9 vertebrae, and they looked like kind of good size, kind of saucer plate sized verts. And I was like, well, that's immediately it's an ichthyosaur. And I thought, well, Rutland is a really unusual location. That I was aware of a couple of specimens that have been found back in like the 70s or something, and that's about it. And so I was like, what's the chance of this? And so I asked for a couple more pictures. Literally, we got super excited, replied immediately, got a few more pictures, and then it was kind of like, oh, this could be something important. And so it was also because it was found during lockdown, right? COVID and stuff. I couldn't physically travel there. So we kind of managed to get permissions for Mark, Dr. Evans, to go there basically about, I think it was that week that we had the email. So we could take a few more pictures and have, as a paleontologist, have his eyes on it immediately. So he snapped some more pictures and he sent them through. And everything, bar this little string of verts, was under the surface, right? Apart from there was one piece of jawbone, which I think was, if I remember rightly, maybe like part of the cerangular, lower jawbone or angular or something. And I said to Mark, I said, Mark, this could be pretty spectacular. And he also come to the same conclusion. And I said, we've got to do something about this. And so within a space of a couple of weeks, we had the permissions. We had to keep a very short team to go there and basically do in the February, as it was found in January, a 1 day kind of preliminary excavation, right? Just to see what was there. Because, of course, it could end up just being a string of vertebrae in Rutland, which, without a doubt, that's really interesting and that's rare. But we, in the back of my mind, because we had this jawbone and we had the verts, and they were separated by several meters, and you could see that in the picture, I was kind of keeping my fingers crossed, thinking maybe, maybe this could be something spectacular. And so on that 1 day dig, there was only what one, two, yeah, four of us that we were allowed to have as my mini kind of team, and a few other people kind of documenting it. And we spent the entire day, kind of sunrise to sunset, just removing this really at that point really squelchy mud, and we removed as much as we wanted to, and there and then realized we're dealing with an animal that's going to be about 10 meters long and that it potentially could be complete. And we all kind of sat round, especially when we'd kind of unearthed it and we saw what we for the first time looking at that. We didn't touch the skull area because we said, look, if that skull is there, we don't want to have to disturb it and then replace it again and put the mud back over. So we all stood around. All of us had goosebumps. It was that kind of thing where we knew this was going to be a major find. How major, we weren't even sure back then. And so it seemed kind of counterintuitive, but of course, because it was damp, wintry, even icy conditions, the lagoon in which it was found was covered over with a layer of ice. We had to then carefully cover it back over with kind of tarpaulins and plastic sheets and things, and then the mud. And then actually the ichthyosaur went back underwater until the summer. And then that's when I could come back with a slightly larger team of paleontologists and volunteers to then assist me and actually spend what was ultimately a 3 week excavation. But I think, if memory serves me right, technically working again sunrise, sunset would have been spread out over just somewhere like 13 or 14 days. And if you'd have split it out over 9 to 5, you're probably talking a proper 3 week excavation. But yeah, and that was kind of obviously me leading the dig overall with also Nigel Larkin leading on the conservation. So Nigel, really great friend of mine, he led on the conservation side of things, and between the two of us working on our experiences of me digging up dinosaurs in America and stuff, and he working on a variety of things, we could work out how best to split up the skeleton and things. And then Mark was working on the kind of collection side of things and keeping it documented with another person, Dr. Emma Nichols. But there was a point where I think it must have been the point where you'll have, of course, seen that picture of me laying down on the job, right? Laying next to it.
Yes.
Yeah. And that, of course, became such an iconic image when around the world, and yeah, when it was announced in January 2022 to the world, that was covered globally everywhere. It was, yeah, reaching millions and millions of people. I can't offhand, I'd have to dig out the figure, but I think it was, well, it was hundreds of millions of people apparently that it had reached. I think one of the quotes was over 1 billion, but I was like, really? But anyway,
Wow.
whether that was true or not, I'm not sure. But it reached a lot of people, and I'd say kind of, yeah, I don't know, 6 out of 10 people that I've met over the years since it was announced, people have heard of that discovery, which is quite something, and that's kind of dotted around the world. But yeah, there was a point I just want to say where we did, coming back to that picture of me laying down next to it, you've seen the kind of trench that we made around the full skeleton. There was a point where me and the team members there, where you had it kind of fully exposed from the tip of the snout to the very end of the tail, where you've got those kind of penny-sized vertebrae at the end of the tail. And it was just, I say, about goosebumps. So it was a moment where we all kind of realized just how significant a find this is. And there's no kind of beating around the bush, or there's no exaggeration. It genuinely, without a doubt, is one of the greatest finds in British paleontological history. No,
I can believe
no
it.
exaggeration.
I mean, it's a
And
really
to
huge specimen as well.
yeah, it really is. Yeah, and to have it so well preserved, and the fact of it is when we come around to finally having it all fully cleaned and prepared, the big, it's a huge project, of course, huge process as well, is that you've got to flip the entire thing over and prepare the underside, because technically that's what will be best preserved, and it will be. But that's where we also hope we might have stomach contents. There may be things like even a fetus or something in there. We don't know. So there's a lot to, yeah, to discover with it. We've already written one paper on it so far, and that was more about the original discovery and some of the kind of media outpouring and all that sort of stuff. But we have a lot of exciting research on the pipeline, kind of on the Rutland Sea Dragon. But yeah, it's without a doubt is an extraordinary find. And I think for me personally, having led the dig and being kind of fascinated by and inspired by the likes of Mary Anning, and the fact that Mary Anning, of course, found the first ichthyosaur, brought to the attention of science. Of course, she didn't find the first ichthyosaurs; they've been found for many, many years before her. But she and her brother Joseph had found the first, brought to the attention of science, and ultimately it was a Tendodontosaurus, which is also what the Rutland Sea Dragon is. I thought it was quite a nice full circle kind of moment there for yeah, ichthyosaurs and British paleontology. So yeah, a really spectacular and very special find.
It kind of puts your it well, not kind of, it does put your name in the same conversation as people like Mary Anning and William Buckland and such for like recovering these what's what I'm looking for, like remarkable fossils from in Britain.
Yeah, it's
Um,
nice. Yeah, it's nice. I've never really thought about it like that too, I guess. But yeah, maybe down the line, 50 years, 100 years down the line, I'm assuming people will talk about that discovery and its significance and stuff. And yeah, I guess my name will be linked with it forever. So yeah, it's interesting to think about it like that.
That's not bad.
it's part of it. It's solidly part of British paleontological history. Um,
Mm.
just want to jump on that one again, just quickly. Uh, I did read about this, but my memory's failing me a bit. Is the Rutland Sea Dragon now on display anywhere? I can't remember.
No, so we've had it's one of the frustrations, and probably one of the biggest frustrations. As you imagine, with something such a significant find, and that we had a lot of red tape and things to go through and working
Yeah.
out what's going to happen with it down the line. And you may have seen or read that it ultimately will return to Rutland. That hasn't
Yes,
happened
that's
yet
what
because
I
it
read.
hasn't been fully cleaned. We are still,
Right.
it's been a bit of a battle finding funding for it because it's such a huge specimen, and for the museum where it would go in Rutland, which is Rutland County Museum, they have to redevelop their galleries and things to accommodate it and other things. And so there's been a big battle to find funding for it, and so we are closer to that step. And I still think, which is sad to say, because there'll be some people listen to this who'll be like, "Oh, darn, I was really hoping to see it tomorrow," but it's still gonna be yeah, it's still gonna be a few years, unfortunately. But it's one of them things where it's been sitting there for 180 million plus 5 years, so it
Yep.
hopefully won't be going anywhere soon. And it's kind of like slow and steady wins the race kind of thing. Hopefully it will get there, and once we've got it fully cleaned up and prepared, and we can really understand kind of the story behind it, kind of like almost like a CSI style investigation, and work out what happened to it. And as I say, going back to Rutland, it's significant because for multiple reasons, but primarily it's important for people local to Rutland who can then really celebrate such a significant find. And definitely it'll be a big draw for people to come and physically see that skeleton, which is by far the largest complete skeleton of any prehistoric reptile ever found in Britain, which is remarkable.
Amazing. Yeah.
I mean, that's fantastic that it's going to be in Rutland.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
kind of. Do you remember before the break, the holiday break, we were talking about Tarbosaurus
Yes, the one
in
going back
France,
to
going back to
Mongolia.
Mongolia.
Yeah,
I'm big fan of that kind of thing. Like
repatriate.
local people being
Yeah.
able to see what their country, or in this case, what their region has. Yeah.
Mm.
But I said, good things come to those that wait. So
Mm.
that's awesome.
Yeah. We were talking about the fact that you've been able to get in on some of these things and see them from the very beginning. And you are, well, most people would be lucky enough to name a child or a pet, and can only dream of naming a species. I've got to ask you this. You've named six of them. What's that like? That is, in my view, possibly one of the pinnacles of, or certainly one of the things I've always wanted to tick off on the bucket list, as it were.
Yeah, it's. Let me think. Is it six? Let's think about it. It might be more, actually. So you
I think
can name
I
them.
You've got that figure.
oh, might be more. Sorry, I misheard you
Yeah.
there.
Oh,
Might
it's.
be
I don't know.
more.
That's all good. No, it's all good. It's easily done. I'm just thinking now because of the recent one. So we work it out. So you've got Ichthyosaurus anningae, which obviously I named after Mary Anning. That was the first one
Mm.
after like named and named in honor of Mary, which is absolutely amazing. It was such a cool thing to do that, and incredible really to think that that was also the first ichthyosaur ever named after Mary Anning, despite the fact
Yeah,
200
yeah.
years ago she was the one bringing them to the attention of science. So yeah, it was a real honor to do that. Then Ichthyosaurus larkini, Ichthyosaurus somersetensis, Wallosaurus macerae, which are actually named after Judy Macerae and Bill Wall, those two
Mm.
major
Yeah,
mentors of mine who I met in Wyoming. That's that four. Hesperornithoides, I mean, he's all right. That's a dinosaur, a velociraptor-like dinosaur from
yeah,
Wyoming. Protoichthyosaurus, Appleby. Obviously, giant Ichthyotitan sevenensis, and then recently Zyphodrachum,
Mm.
Golden Capensis. So yeah, eight. So yeah,
eight
eight
now.
species. Yeah, which is funny, isn't it? And there's a whole bunch of stuff I've had in the pipeline for a long time as well. Other ichthyosaurs, that maybe new species, some dinosaurs, and some invertebrates and things too. But it is admittedly, Aaron Gareth, it's a really awesome thing to be able to name a new species and to go through that process of working out kind of how you determine it's something new and looking at all the features in the skull and postcranium. We're looking at all those features, comparing it to, in my case, hundreds of other ichthyosaurs and in Hesperornithoides, other dinosaurs, to work out that you actually have something new, and then having that honor to come up with a name and naming it after like the likes of Mary Anning and things is yeah, truly an honor. And it's been quite nice. So yeah, I've named eight things now, and yeah, your name kind of goes down in history with each of those names as well. It'll always be
Yeah.
synonymous with that too. So
Yeah.
it's been quite special naming those things. And one of the coolest things I would say about that is, and this is a bit of a mini story that I shared with Professor Judy Macerae. So Judy and I, when we worked out that Ichthyosaurus anningae was something distinct, one of the kind of moments that we had, we're actually in the basement of the Natural History Museum in London looking at some of the specimens where we found another one. And we both had that realization that, yeah, definitely it's a new species. And for that moment in time, we were the only two people on the planet that knew that. And having that is,
Yeah.
yeah, it's such a cool feeling. And that is one of the coolest things about science, of course, is that we're always learning and there's always new research. And so there are scientists around the world discovering stuff right now that nobody else knows about. And being part of that and kind of in the case of Annie and the others, yeah, providing that little piece of a gigantic jigsaw puzzle was quite cool.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that would ever get old, to be honest. That's
Yeah, it's
such a
not. It
special.
absolutely is not. No, 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 definitely not, Aaron. And every time, yeah, if I'm in the process with a team or if it's me who's coming up with the names and stuff, yeah, I never take any of this stuff kind of, easy as if it's kind of, oh yeah, it's just one of those things. Not at all. No, I'm always kind of 110% kind of guy with this sort of stuff, and I'm always so super proud about working on things, whether it's naming something new or whether it's the description of another fossil or whatever it might be, academic work or books and things. So I'm always, yeah, one of those people who's, yeah, very, very, very much, yeah, proud, and you never kind of get used to it. You're always like, oh yeah, yeah, I named that. You did that, and it's one of the things as a paleontologist as well is, and I guess for me personally, maybe it's a me thing, is I'm always kind of looking forward. You don't necessarily look back, which is bad. You should reflect on it, but sometimes, and it takes like a podcast like this to reflect on things and actually like, oh yeah, I guess I did do that. That was pretty cool. So yeah, it never
Well,
gets old.
if you're ever stumped for a name, Natural History Cupboard Eye is a it's very
I'll bear that in mind. I'll bear that in mind,
it
definitely,
really rolls
Gareth.
off the tongue now.
Yeah.
I don't think you can see it on the in the view, but down there, there's got to be like 4 or 5 different sized ammonites, and here there's loads of ammonites that I've just found going along like Jurassic Coast or up by Minehead and stuff. And I'm like a kid. Like when I find it, it doesn't matter if it's like near like if I can't myself pick out the difference between one that I've already got and one that I've just found. It doesn't matter. I freak out about it. It's like because it's the first time anyone's seen this.
Yeah.
That never gets old to me. So just being able to name a species is just like that. That's another level of special. But
Yeah.
I don't think I
Yeah.
can even comprehend that. That's really cool.
Yeah, no,
Um,
it's so cool, and it's a very good analogy as well to that finding a fossil as well as the same thing. I say it so often, especially as part of my public outreach, is that you are literally the first time, the first person seeing said fossil in X million years, and it's such a magical experience, and yeah, it never gets old, and you might find. Like I've got on my desk around me, as you might imagine, in the office, like lots of fossils, but even I always have Yorkshire nearby, so an ammonite, that Taliasaurus commune, one that I picked up at Yorkshire Coast years and years ago. So I find that in a nodule, popping that beastie open and seeing your beautiful ammonite preserved in there. And again, it just doesn't get old. You just never know what you're going to find, and that's yeah, it's curiosity as well. That's one of the key things.
so moving towards your more kind of your working kind of literature, you are actually a best-selling author. Um, And in fact, you've authored no less than it's 14 books now, isn't it?
Yeah.
The Secret Lives of Dinosaurs. Um, your most recent one is, as I say, called The Secret Lives of Dinosaurs, which is a fantastic book detailing what the field understands of dinosaur ethology. Um, what inspired you to delve into dinosaur behavior?
So for me, again, kind of looking at dinosaur behavior, but also kind of prehistoric animal behavior. Although Secret Lives Dinosaurs, obviously the title, the subtitle is really what gets at the book in terms of looking at that kind of broader picture of prehistoric animal behavior. And I had always had a fascination, again, going back to kind of growing up and watching documentaries and things of dinosaurs, how they behave. So if you think of something like the original Walk with Dinosaurs and even Jurassic Park, right? How fast could a T-Rex run and all this sort of stuff, and how did it
Mm,
eat and all that thing.
yeah.
And as I again got a little bit older, I kind of thought, well, maybe there are fossils out there of extraordinary evidence of kind of fighting and feeding and all that sort of stuff. And I'd known about things like the amazing, incredible fighting dinosaurs, the Velociraptor and Protoceratops found in Mongolia,
Yeah.
literally found in kind of combat, locked in time. And when I again this trip to Wyoming, it was such a foundational trip. When I was in Wyoming the first time in 2008, the very first day, I was given a kind of tour of the museum, and I was shown by this lad who was a volunteer from Spain, funnily enough, called Geordie. Geordie showed me this large limestone slab, and he said to me, "Oh, what do you make of this?" And it looked like some kind of trackway or trampling or something. And he said, "Just follow it." And I followed it. And right at the end of this track was a little horseshoe crab, a juvenile horseshoe crab. And basically
Oh,
what I was looking at was one of these incredible moments of what was a late Jurassic, roughly 150-ish million year old horseshoe crab that was literally dead in its tracks. The track was 9.7 meters, like 33 feet long, and it was just so mind-blowing that it then got me thinking about behavior even more and coming back to that fact of, yeah, things like fighting dinosaurs and that. And I'd looked at way back then. I mean, funnily enough, I should say I ended up describing that horseshoe crab trackway a few years later with a paleontologist called Chris Racy, who then worked at the Dinosaur Centre. And it really gave me that idea back then for a book on behaviors. And in actual fact, that led to this book called Locked in Time, which in many ways is kind of a predecessor to The Secret Lives of Dinosaurs. It's also a very, very different book if you've read the two of them. But The Secret Lives of Dinosaurs kind of grew out off the back of that original kind of um, time that I actually looked at this horseshoe crab and where that kind of idea of books or a book dedicated to behavior. And then when I'd written Locked in Time and it did really well, and the publishers were keen to explore more and work with the wonderful Bob Nichols, the artist, he and I sat down and I said, Bob, I've always wanted to kind of take the idea of prehistoric animal behavior and especially like looking at dinosaurs to another level and to kind of dive deeper into the literature, go to museums, go to more excavations to look at fossils with direct evidence of behavior. And most people might think, well, how can a fossil behave? How do you have behavior preserved? And in most cases, it's extremely rare. As I said, kind of it might be last meal preserved. You might have a pregnant fossil. You might have evidence of disease and things like that. And ultimately, the Locked in Time and the Secret Lives of Dinosaurs allowed me to kind of explore what we know of in kind of looking at direct evidence of behaviors in prehistoric animals. Nobody had actually ever done that before in any kind of popular writing. There'd been academic books that had kind of covered this ground a little bit before, which were very useful, but nobody had ever actually looked at it. So it's a very novel concept for a book in paleontology because kind of in paleontology books, dinosaur books, it's very hard to come up with something new. Everybody kind of reinvents the wheel. You may have, I don't know, every decade, every 15 years, a new author will come out with a new book of kind of, hey, this is the story of the dinosaurs, and this is kind of a timeline, or as the new discoveries changing kind of our perceptions. And that's great. That's really good. But there's not really many very novel, very unusual approaches to telling the story of dinosaurs and prehistoric animals. And so that's what ultimately the Secret Lives of Dinosaurs does. And so yeah, it's been great fun working on that. It took me 3.5 years to write it.
3.5 years.
I mean,
Yeah.
I instantly in my head that fossil of the horseshoe crab. That's what came to mind when thinking of that because that is such a beautiful yet tragic fossil
Yeah,
of
it is.
its last steps, basically.
Yeah, most definitely. That's always the thing is many of these fossils are kind of very tragic, of course, and that one in particular, because essentially you've got the horseshoe crab that literally suffocated to death, and it's a young juvenile. It's very sad and tragic, but it allows, well, it tells so much more information that we can
Yeah.
glean from that from if it was just a horseshoe crab or if it was just a track.
So what is your writing process like? And did you make a conscious effort? You've pretty much answered this to sort of have the Secret Life of Dinosaurs feel somewhat like a spiritual sequel to previous work. Although, like I say, you've pretty much covered the second half of that there.
Yeah, yeah. In many ways, it kind of given that Locked in Time did incredibly well, and all of the kind of feedback and positive comments that we received about that book was fantastic. Most things were kind of 5 stars, 5 out of 5 type thing, and so I wanted to do in many ways kind of same but different, and the same section, same aspect of it was to focus on behavior, but just to open it in a different way and look at it almost like what I kind of say, and I think I talk about this in the introduction if I remember rightly, the book, but I wanted to look at this almost as if it was like kind of the lives of a lion or something like that, and it's kind of the cub's just been born. You've got the cub, and it's kind of going through that process of learning its behaviors, and it's got to go off and fight. It might get diseased. It might have to kind of join another family, all that sort of stuff, and then obviously its demise. This narrative is literally the story of life. It's the grand cycle of life told through extraordinary fossils.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why you mentioned Walking with Dinosaurs earlier on. I think that's why the possibly my favorite one of those was the Ballad of Big Al, which was that
Yeah.
random one that they did afterwards, where they looked at that Allosaurus and then talked about all its sort of injuries that it sustained throughout its life and then was preserved with it. So it very much paints that same sort of picture of a life lived and the behaviors that go on in it. So yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah. I'm actually going to dive a little bit into that now because you've just mentioned injuries on that you can find on bones and stuff, and you've already mentioned things like pregnancy or trace fossils like trackways or bones being in where the stomach would be. So I've always found ethology very, very interesting. It's most of or a lot of my career in zookeeping, I kind of tried to specialize in that. And I think it's absolutely fascinating that science can now describe how long extinct species likely behaved. But simultaneously, that's something that is very difficult to uh, kind of to communicate with the public about living animals, let alone extinct animals. What evidence can we look for in the physical fossils and their matrices that can provide clues as to how these animals lived and behaved?
Yeah, I guess, as I say, I guess I touched upon it slightly where you've got to look for, in some cases, it's really apparent. So if you look at, say, finding an embryo or a fetus inside a marine reptile, say an ichthyosaur,
Mm.
that already is you've got direct evidence of behavior there. That is the behavior that A, these animals give live birth, B, you physically have a fetus or something in there. And then in extraordinary cases, we do have ichthyosaurs, very, very rare ichthyosaurs that literally gave live birth and they were tragically caught in the act of giving birth and died, perished during that. So all that kind of thing immediately, they're the real ones that are super rare, but they're also very obvious at the same time. Now you
Yeah.
mentioned obviously we talked a bit about Big Al as well, and I actually talk about Big Al and figure Big Al in the Secret Lives of Dinosaurs because I too, Gareth, was really inspired by that kind of I guess standalone spin-off from the original Walk with Dinosaurs. I thought it was fantastic. I actually still think that was actually better than the original series because
Yeah,
it breathed real life into dinosaurs in a documentary for the first and technically only time. There's been other documentaries that have along the way, kind of here and there, used some kind of direct evidence of behaviors, but that was one where it was solely focused on what you could see in the fossil and the interpretations of it. So there are times, though, Aaron, to answer your question, there are times where there are fossils and things where you might have, I don't know, it could be, if we talk about disease, there could be some things where there could be something very obvious, like a broken bone that's rehealed, and you can
Yeah.
clearly see that in the fossil. But other times it could be something where it's a little bit more difficult to interpret. So with a disease, for instance, with Tyrannosaurus Rex and also other tyrannosaurids, so things like Gorgosaurus and Albertosaurus, Daspletosaurus, that sort of stuff, there are several individuals that have been found with these weird holes in their lower jaws. And that had been kind of proposed for a long time, whether it was from biting, are they kind of holes from biting? Is it disease? Is it something entirely different? And the best kind of interpretation that kind of has been published, and most people have agreed with, is it's probably due to disease But of course, it is a thing where you can separate one way or another. And this is where I like the fact that you were talking about, where you can actually use, and which is what I've done in Secret Lives of Dinosaurs, and which is what I like to do as a paleontologist when we talk about paleoethology, is that you can use modern animals as well. Sometimes, not always, of course, because things are very, very different in some cases back then, and it's
Yeah.
difficult to find analogs. But you, in that case, for the T-Rex and co, with these holes match up with the really weird disease that you get in some birds. You get in pigeons and things, which is called trichomoniasis, which is a parasite,
Mhm.
and that eats
Right. Yeah.
away at the lower jaw. And that's exactly what we found, exactly the same telltale evidence in Tyrannosaurus Rex and other Tyrannosaurids. And so those types of things are harder to see. But again, you've got to have, I guess, one, you've got to have that experience and realize what it is you're looking at. But also the second part of it, which is why Secret Lives of Dinosaurs is again is so different to many other books that are out there, is that we're then privileged and very lucky to have this kind of cohort of fossils that are incredibly rare on at large. 99% of the things that's in the book are, in most cases, either one-offs or there's a handful of them that show the same behaviors. But it comes down to incredibly rare fossils and people having that bit of knowledge to actually spot that and say, oh, that is blah blah behavior. What's the evidence to back that up? And maybe you find another specimen, or maybe you look to the modern animal kingdom and behaviors that we see in modern animals, and you can apply that similarly to prehistoric animals too.
Goes to what we always say, like you have to be extremely lucky to become a fossil, and then even luckier to be a fossil that's then discovered. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to sort of dive back into another bit of paleo media that you've been involved with, 2024's Why Dinosaur. Can you tell us how that came to be as a well, as a film?
Yeah, for sure. So with Why Dinosaurs, so that goes back, let me think, probably 6, 7, 8 years or something now, where originally, so it's a father and son team, Tony and James Pinto, who had come up with this idea. And Tony, basically, the father, had kind of said, hey, my son wants to be a paleontologist. Tony's a filmmaker, and he kind of figured maybe there's an idea for a film here about how so many of us have a fascination with dinosaurs and paleontology, but how do you really get into that field? And so, to keep it very brief, basically, Tony and James came up with this idea of traveling around the globe to interview paleontologists, kind of paleo fans, people from Jurassic World, Jurassic Park, pop culture, people in paleontology, dinosaurs, whatever it might be, anybody and everybody who had a real fascination, and to find out where it came from, but all at kind of at large trying to answer this question: why dinosaurs? What is our fascination with them? And so when I became involved, originally this was right at the beginning of the project, where one of my good friends, Elaine Howard, who is also an executive producer like me, and she actually recommended that Tony and James get in touch with me, which they did, and we just hit it off really well. And obviously, I have a lot of experience working in TV, whether that's in front of the camera or behind the camera as an expert consultant and so on. And so I kind of really helped them kind of from the beginning, open up some doors in paleontology and stuff as well. And I've been an ever present with the film going forward. And so I actually was the person who introduced the film in the heart of Hollywood as well, which is right on Sunset Boulevard, which is pretty
Wow.
cool. Again, that from a media point of view is one of my career highs from a straight up media point of view, because it was fantastic. We had a sold out event, 400 plus people there in the audience. I think the night before, was it something like Scorsese and DiCaprio were on the same stage that I was at introducing this film. So being that person to do that and being still that dinosaur loving kid from Doncaster, having that childlike fascination to be the guy then introducing this film and being the lead paleontologist in there and an executive producer for this film has been quite fantastic. And I know, I think I met, was it the two of you or was it Aaron at one of the
No, no,
screenings we
yeah,
had? Yeah, in Lyme
that's
Regis,
right.
right? So yeah, and so we did like a mini UK kind of a few tour as well, and kind of screenings, and there's a whole bunch that happened in the States and a couple of others elsewhere. And then last year, 2025, it eventually went kind of onto PBS, so it could be seen globally, but primarily in the States. It was shown across PBS and has done incredibly well for them. And then just recently, it officially now is on YouTube, because that was one of the big things early on, because it was partly or primarily funded, I should say, by the public, who people who wanted to make this documentary happen. It was always a plan that down the line it would be great to get it out there, so freely available for anybody and everybody. And I think within a space of like a week, it's had nearly 250,000 views, which is marvelous. It
Wow,
genuinely,
that's
yeah, it's pretty cool,
incredible.
and yeah, it really is, and it's a fantastic. If I say so myself, it's a fantastic documentary, and I know obviously I know you enjoyed it as well, but it's now won, I think, 6 or 7 awards as well. Like it's genuinely a brilliant film, just filled with people's passions and telling that story of yeah, why dinosaurs? Why are we fascinated with this subject?
Hell of a feat to track down paleontologists and Jurassic franchise representatives. That's incredible. And yeah, we thoroughly enjoyed it. When you've
Yeah.
already mentioned, we met you at Lyme Regis briefly at the Fossil Festival. It was an incredible film,
Mm.
and the yeah, Q&A afterwards was really good too. One question we'd be remiss not to ask, however, is how's James Pinto's continued journey? He's the son
Mm.
that was kind of featured there. What's he up to nowadays?
Yeah, so he he's actually still within paleontology. He's currently doing or finishing up his PhD,
Mm.
and going into a postdoc as well. Or maybe I've got it mixed up. Maybe if James listens to this, he's going to be like, "No, Dean, no, Dr. Lomax." I'm curious whether actually I can't remember now off the top of my head whether he's finishing his PhD or he's finished it and he's onto a postdoc. I still keep in touch quite frequently with Tony, and Tony, I'm no doubt, hey Tony, because you'll probably listen to this. He often listens, and we keep up to date with various different things and have other projects kind of on the back burner and things we want to do. So I do hear about James's travels, but absolutely, he's still in paleontology. He's actually
Good.
published now a few papers, which is pretty amazing. He doesn't work on
Yeah.
dinosaurs though, which is I always find quite amusing, because of course this documentary is why dinosaurs. But he actually works on kind of your kind of early predecessors of mammals and things like that now. So yeah, in other interesting area and that, but yeah, he's done really well. But yeah, in particular, I think it was nice to bring kind of why dinosaurs to the UK market as well. And for those who watched it, I think altogether, with I think 6 screenings we did in total, I think we had maybe a couple of thousand people see it, and everybody seemed to love it. And I know you were keen to chat a bit about like kind of what it was like speaking at these things as well, and like obviously doing TED Talks and that it can be very stressful. But I think I always get asked that question of kind of what's one of the biggest or kind of favorite things about being a paleontologist, what area, and most people would be like, oh yeah, it must be naming new species or digging up ichthyosaurs and dinosaurs and things, writing books. But at large, I actually think the outreach side of things is one of the most fascinating things. Like what we're doing now, obviously, this is part of outreach. But I actually think, although it can be very stressful doing big things like TED Talks and opening a film in Hollywood, it is a huge thing, I think, for me personally, because you can connect with so many more people, and that's one of the things where as a paleontologist, very much in the public domain, working on TV, behind the scenes, in front of the camera and stuff, I know that from a field of paleontology, there's only kind of so few people who are really fascinated in it. But when you open up the world to media and things, you can open it up to millions and millions of people, and that angle and kind of doing Q&As and all that sort of stuff is so massively important to connecting, and I would say bridging that gap between kind of academia and the general public, and not just the general public who like dinosaurs in Jurassic Park, but those who may have a very brief passing interest in natural history. And in my head, it's always a case of if somebody hears me talk or watches a program or something that I'm presenting or whatever it might be,
Mm.
and they find my passion or whatever enthusiastic, and they're like, "Oh, this is interesting. I want to learn more." Then great, I've done my job. That's the key thing for me. So, and that's important as a science communicator, especially in today's day and age where there's lots of fake news and lots of misinformation, miscommunication, and all that jazz floating around social media and stuff. So yeah, I find it quite an important job to make sure we get good hardcore science out there.
Definitely. It's done in such a easy to access way as well.
Yeah.
For like watching the film, it's not loaded with jargon. And actually, that's one of the things I found listening to some of the other things that you've done, your TED talks, and the I've listened to one or two of your times that you've been on other podcasts over the years as well. Like one I listened to, I think it was last year. I listened to was one on I Know Dino,
Mm.
and it's not loaded with jargon that someone wouldn't be able to comprehend. It's nice. It's all easy to access when you do put it out there. Mm.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, I try to pride myself on doing that because, of course, there's pointless. I mean, obviously, sometimes I'll include some jargon. I mean, obviously, like in my books and stuff, but I'll ensure it's either done with a little bit of humor or it's at least explained properly. Because, yeah, I think it just opens up the world quite a bit more to other people who are not paleontologists and people who love this field or are interested in it or who may have a passing interest. So, yeah, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
If you had one message that you'd hope our followers would take away from this chat, or a piece of advice or wisdom that you'd want to impart, what would that be? I know it's nice and easy. Boil down everything that you've said into one nice quotable soundbite, if you will. You know.
Yeah, that's always really hard to answer, but I will keep it very, very short and say as I always say to people as well is it sounds very basic and quite a kind of blasé comment, but follow your passion. Follow your passion. That is what I've done. I was up against it from the start in many respects, come from incredibly poor area in Doncaster, had failed science in school, had no career prospects, came from little money, was told multiple times repeatedly from teachers even that I wouldn't be a paleontologist because of where I'm from, all this sort of stuff. But I didn't let that define me as a person. I wanted to follow my passion, and my passion was paleontology. And so I immersed myself in that field as we've just been discussing, and really just worked my arse off and continue to follow my passion. And still to this day, that's what I do. And if I'm working on whatever it might be, whether it's a book, research, TV stuff, and museum work, books, whatever it might be. It always is in the back of my mind, and I have to tell myself sometimes. And as I say, I never take any of this stuff for granted, but I always say it's about your passion, having that passion, drive, and persistence, and especially to make it in a field like paleontology, as you well know, is incredibly niche. It's very hard
Mm.
to get into professionally. And for me to make it in this field and coming from a very unconventional background and getting into it the way I have done is something which I know a lot of people have taken that on board my kind of journey and really put that into practice as well. And people have I've had many people over the years, mostly hundreds of people who have either emailed or spoken to me at conferences or come to talks of mine, events and things, and say that I've been their inspiration. And that's from my point of view of that kid always fascinated with dinosaurs and fossils and stuff, and reading about people who had inspired me to now be the inspiration of many people is quite humbling. So I will always say follow your passion. That's key.
Awesome. I think it's the number one driving thing for anything. Yeah.
It is, especially in that especially in the natural world, the natural sciences, the natural history, and all that for sure. Before we finish up, if I may, I've got a couple of silly questions for you,
Yeah.
if that's all right.
Yeah.
See, these are some of the questions that we're often asked, as as people that have worked in the zookeeping field, but uh, one of the collections we worked at had these, let's say, awful dinosaur representations.
I did everything I could to make sure that they were better.
So the first one up is, what was your favorite species? Can be extant or extinct growing up, and is it still your favorite today?
So my favorite species growing up was actually a dinosaur. Kind of no surprise there. It was Stegosaurus.
Ah, good
And
choice.
yeah, and it actually isn't my favorite anymore. So when I got to my kind of teenage years and kind of learned about a bunch of other stuff, actually Baryonyx ended up becoming my favorite dinosaur.
Another good
And
choice.
yeah, and that now has always remained The case actually, even to this day, it's my favorite dinosaur, and it's often something I get asked, like, "What's your favorite dinosaur?" and stuff. So yeah, it would be baryonyx. I think favorite species is difficult. I'd end up being probably I'd probably still say baryonyx, but to a point, I'd end up also going defaulting to Ichthyosaurus anningae. Simply not just the fact of saying, "Hey, I named that," but it's not that. It's more about that kind of rich British history of paleontology being intertwined with Mary Anning and being the first person to name an ichthyosaur after Mary Anning. I think that would also have to be up there as yeah, one of the favorites.
That's really cool.
I think we've covered all three of those species. And so every week, at least in the old format leading up to the end of last year, every week we kind of shine a spotlight on a species. Extinct, extant. We try to mix up. I think we've covered all three of those, haven't we?
Well, I've definitely done baryonyx because that
You've
was one of
done.
my favourites.
I'm pretty sure you
Yeah,
did
great.
Stegosaur as well. And I
Yeah.
did Ichthyosaur.
No, I did ichthyosaur as
Oh,
well.
you did all three of them.
I've got all
Fair
three
enough.
of those.
Fair enough. So next question. What is your favourite fossil that you've collected or recovered?
Oh man. Oh, oh, that's so hard because I legitimately must have collected now more than 50,000 fossils easily. Yeah,
Whoa.
maybe more, and oh, that's really hard. I'd have to give you two. So
Go
the
on.
first one was in 2009, where we were excavating at a Maiasaura bone bed. So you're very familiar with the dinosaur Maiasaura.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so the good mother lizard Maiasaura, or the so-called kind of duck-billed dinosaurs, and we were excavating this bone bed where we just kind of just a mishmash of Maiasaura bones everywhere, like so many individuals, juveniles, adults, and stuff. And then just in the kind of midst of that, we're digging away, and me and the a paleontologist who were working together, a really good friend called Greg Wilson. He and I are like digging at the same spot, and then all of a sudden we both just spot this tooth sticking out. And anyway, it turns out it was the lower jaw incomplete dentary of a juvenile Gorgosaurus,
Oh.
Tyrannosaurus. So, yes. So we were both like, "Whoa, what? This is a Tyrannosaurid jaw, and it's in the midst of all this stuff. You know, was it feeding on them? Was it just washed in? All that sort of stuff." So that was, yeah, that was pretty awesome. And then I would have to say the other one would be for so many different reasons. When I was on a major expedition in 2022 to Chile and Patagonia, so this is what the locals call the arse end of nowhere, so right down South America. It's almost like opposite Antarctica, and we were in a an area called Torres del Paine National Park, really beautiful part of the world, and we went to a site that is so remote. To get there it's like a 10-hour hike or it's a 5-hour horseback ride, and fewer than probably 50 people have been there in the world. Like, it's that remote. And you may well know that there's kind of a written rule that on the last day or the second to last day you end up finding like a cool fossil, right?
Mm.
And so it's like a normal thing within paleontologists on digs, and so like it always happens. And so we were actually there to excavate what turned out to be a pregnant ichthyosaur, which actually nicknamed Fiona, which I talk about in the Secret Lives of Dinosaurs. And on the last day of excavating Fiona, I said, whilst they were finishing up a few details, kind of conservation side of things, I said, "Hey, I'm just going to go and wander closer to the ice cap that you can see in the background, the glacier in the background, which has basically been retreating for years and years, and which is what's revealed all these ichthyosaurs." And so I'm wandering around, and then I just walk, I don't know, 100 feet, and I look down, and you've got this absolutely stunning baby ichthyosaur, what I like to call ichlet, just staring at me. And it was a just practically complete skull. There's a
Yeah.
portion of the vertebral column. The rest of it's clearly there going into the rock. And it was like a stunning blue color because of how it's kind of oxidized, where it's been scraped back by the glacier, and then the kind of oxidation of the bone and stuff had changed the color to a point. And I just stood there. I legitimately did a dance. Like, I was dancing around, like saying, "Oh my goodness, what an incredible fossil this is!" And I shouted over the trip leader, Dr. Judith Pardo Perez, and Judith came over, and she almost started crying because her PhD, her research has been focused on this area for like a decade or more, and she'd never found a specimen that complete and a juvenile. And so, yeah, she was thrilled to bits, and as was I. So, yeah, those two I would say, and for various reasons, yeah, those two both hold a special place in my paleontologist's heart.
Cool. Just want to jump off that a little bit, just quickly. Is there anywhere in the world that you haven't gone to dig that you'd like to?
Uh, yeah, great. Yeah, I guess there's a lot of places actually I'd still love to go to. One of them would be Antarctica. I'd like to go to Antarctica and dig. So there's a lot of obviously exposed rocks there from the Jurassic. You find ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs and dinosaurs and things. I'd like to go there. I'd also would like to go at some point to China. I've been invited to go to China a couple of times over the years, but it's just finding time and stuff to go there. But at some point, for sure, I'd love to go there and whatnot. And then the other one, which may actually end up changing this year, we'll see. But I meant another one is Australia. There's a lot of cool stuff coming out in Australia. Again, dinosaurs, marine reptiles, and things. And I may end up being on a dig this year in Australia and maybe part of some events and stuff there. So that would be pretty cool. That tick that one off the bucket list.
That's
Very
awesome.
nice.
Okay, last silly question. What is you're gonna this is the question out of all the questions that we've given you tonight, this is the question you're gonna be judged on the most. It's
Right, great.
No pressure.
what is your favorite Jurassic franchise film and why is it The Lost World?
Okay. So Lost World is great. It is great. But my favorite has to be the OG goat of the franchise, Jurassic Park. And I think I'll give you the very short answer to that. It just changed the public's perception of paleontology, dinosaurs. It got so many more people into museums and talking about the science of paleontology. And for that, like, hats off to it. Also, it's a genuinely fantastic film. It's a really great,
It's
yeah, it's a really great concept when Crichton came up with that. Obviously, he wrote the book and stuff. I think yeah, it's a genuinely great film, and so yeah, that's my favorite. But I'm also I should point out I'm also a fan of the franchise generally. I don't know if you'd seen. I was actually invited to the Jurassic World Rebirth premiere as well last year, which was good fun. Met some of the actors and the producers and got to chat at great length with David Koepp, who originally helped to write with Spielberg
yes.
Jurassic Park and I think Lost World and stuff. He was there and yeah, I had a really good chat to him about a whole bunch of stuff, about some hardcore paleo science as well. So, I am a fan of the franchise, and I think as a scientist, as a paleontologist, it's important not to kind of dismiss it and say, hey, it's all a load of rubbish, blah blah blah. It's not scientific and all this sort of stuff because I think it still brings lots of people from who had that fringe interest in paleo and dinosaurs. It brings them into learning more about the science, and for me, that's a great thing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Good choice as well. Lost World's my favorite, but the original is like joint, really. For me, it's part one and part two.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah.
Right. Well, I haven't got a silly question for you. Let Aaron do all this. So at the end of every one of our interviews, we love to give you our guest the chance to basically plug your efforts and projects and anything that you've got going on. So, what does the future hold for you? And are there any upcoming events in the pipeline that our followers can keep up with, or your efforts online? Also, where can people go to buy your book? Or areas that most benefit you, basically.
Okay, so first of all, then with that, so there's a whole bunch of different projects I've got going on at the moment. Lots of research things that no doubt I think will all be well be published this year. There'll be a few things that will definitely hit the headlines and be in the news, which is exciting. Stuff from the UK and beyond. I've got a big documentary coming out this year as well, which I think will be more towards kind of probably like autumn. I think, and that is very exciting. It incorporates work of mine, research of mine, but also field work here in the UK and in Canada, and that's really exciting for a bunch of reasons. I can say briefly, it's on ichthyosaurs and some of my work, obviously, as you imagine, around ichthyosaurs, but also on some new discoveries, which are like massively exciting. So that's really cool. There's a bunch of other bits and pieces TV wise and stuff that's going on. So yeah, lots of cool stuff and lots of other field work. That looks like it's going to happen. I mentioned Australia potentially. It looks like I'm probably going to go back to Canada for field work, maybe back to Wyoming and stuff as well, which should be good fun. So yeah, looking forward to that. And yeah, inevitably people can keep up to date with my kind of my research and field work and kind of the days in the life of the paleontologist on social media. So primarily Instagram and Facebook. I still have Twitter, but I don't really use it too much. But yeah, I occasionally post stuff on there. But primarily, yeah, Facebook and Instagram. I should probably put more stuff on YouTube as well. I just don't have the time to try and keep on top of that. But yeah, some stuff occasionally does find its way on YouTube if people yeah want to follow on there too. And then in terms of my books, obviously if you're listening to this and you've already read some of my books, I appreciate it for picking up copies of my books. And if you've left reviews, that's even more appreciated because they are they are very sweet to read, especially for the likes of Locked in Time and of course Secret Lives of Dinosaurs. Bob Nichols, the artist, and I, we enjoy nothing more than actually reading good, positive, genuine reviews of our books. So, yeah, if you want to get a copy of The Secret Lives of Dinosaurs in particular, I'd always recommend buying direct from the publisher. That's always best. But if not, as much as many people don't necessarily like it, the likes of Amazon are good as well because if you're able to leave a good, hopefully 5-star review, that actually comes in really helpful because it is as powerful as Amazon has become. Lots of publishers look at reviews and things on Amazon nowadays, and so reviews actually on Amazon do count for quite a lot. So if you are listening to this and you have a copy, please do leave a review. Which actually I should ask the two of you: have you read the book? Do you really enjoy it? Hopefully your answer is yes. And have you left a review?
Haven't left a review. I've got the Locked in Time. I've read that. Haven't read the Secret Life of Dinosaurs one yet, but haven't left a review either. So I'll hold my hand up. I've got some reading to do.
And some writing.
Yeah, and some writing. Yeah,
I'm part way through Secret Lives of Dinosaurs, which I'm enjoying. But I've not done a review yet. So
no worries. I appreciate it. Yeah, as I say, genuinely comes in really, really handy. But also, we collectively, me and Bob, we genuinely do enjoy reading reviews, and it's one of the hardest things. I shared something recently on social media saying that as an author, it's one of the most difficult things putting your work out there in the public domain because, of course, it's open to criticism and everything else. Then, and so having genuine reviews and from people who absolutely loved it and got the concept, realize how unique of a concept it is. It means a lot. So yeah, so I hope you both really do enjoy reading it. Gareth, obviously you've got some catching up to do, and hopefully leave us a 5-star review when you get to that point. But yeah, it's been fantastic chatting with you. This obviously has gone on a bit longer than I guess you anticipated, but there's a lot to unpack, and hopefully, listeners, if you are tuning into this, I hope you've enjoyed listening to me ramble on about my career playing with dinosaurs and other fossils and ichthyosaurs and all that jazz.
It's been wonderful speaking to you.
Yeah.
And we're not worried about the time. The only thing that we worry about with guests and time is that I said it to you before we recorded. Like we're so lucky and privileged that yourself would spend time with us. That we try not to take up too much of that time because it's obviously it's a non-renewable resource and we're very cognizant of that. So don't worry. For you to go on as long as you want is fine, so long as we aren't holding you up. So,
well,
just to reiterate, getting your books direct from the publisher is what benefits you the most as the author.
Yeah, that's always the best because that would ultimately benefit me the most. Yeah, definitely. And in fact, even if you did that, you can still actually post a picture. I'm aware of, apparently you can still post a picture review on Amazon even if you've got the book in hand or whatever. So I know a couple of people who have posted reviews on Amazon who have actually bought it from the publisher, and
Yes,
they obviously because you physically have the book. So yeah, so you can do that, but yeah, definitely buying direct from the publisher is always most beneficial.
Yes, keep that in mind, guys, when you go and buy the books.
Expect a spike in sales from this episode.
Hey, there you go. Yeah, absolutely.
Multiple people. Well, thank you very much for basically coming on and telling us absolutely everything. I've got a multitude of questions that I'm sure I could keep and bore you with for the remainder of all the time, but most of them would be a bit weird. And
it was incredibly difficult
to narrow it down.
The questions that I sent to you, like even to get you that first draft that came to you, I think last year, that just narrowing it down to those was difficult, and I wasn't happy with them when I sent them to you. I can do better than that. There's
Yeah.
more worthy questions, I think. But yeah, no, thank you for giving us your time and for being so giving with the information as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course. No, I appreciate it. I appreciate your kind words too, and I'm always happy to chat to people who are also very passionate, which clearly you both are, about paleontology and the natural world. So yeah, it's been good fun, and it's good also for me personally as well to, as I say, kind of nice to go down memory lane as it were as well sometimes, and go over some of the older stuff that I have worked on, and it's nice to hear. Again, I know from other people that they may have come across some of my earlier research or books and things. You know, one of my books, Dinosaurs: The British Isles, for example, led to the TV series Dinosaur Britain, which I know we've not even touched upon that. And Dinosaur Britain was the first big TV show that I was heavily involved in. Obviously, it was my idea ultimately, and working it up with a guy called Dan Goldsack in TV, and obviously I was the co-presenter on that, and I know full well now it's 11 years old now, which is scary, but I still have people who come to me and say that was one of the best documentaries they ever watched, and it was influential for them, you know, and that was when they were kind of 11, 12, 13, and now they're doing undergrads and masters and things. So yeah, yeah, it's nice to go down memory lane and talk about things occasionally like this, and yeah, reflect a little bit.
I think
I
that
definitely
might
have
have
that
been.
book.
I think that the documentary. I think that might have been my introduction to you. Actually,
All right,
I'm
interesting.
trying
There
to
you go.
remember if it was or
Yeah.
not, but because I've known I know that I've known of you from well before we started doing this podcast. And I'm pretty sure that's where it is. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite possible, and this kind of echoes, as I said, the comment I said earlier about the importance as an academic, as a scientist, in doing outreach and stuff, because that was, I've said it so many times, kind of on record to at various places, but I never had any plans, dreams, you know, in a million years to actually go into TV and presenting, and I wasn't a very confident person growing up, not at all, and it kind of was thrust upon me in many respects. And then I started, the more I did, the more I become more comfortable and also enjoyed it. But also, as I say, you then begin to realize that you can reach a much broader audience, and it's allowed me to then go on and work with the likes of Sir David Attenborough, Stephen Fry, you know, make friends with people like Slash from Guns N' Roses, who of course endorsed The Secret Lives of Dinosaurs. So it's amazing how powerful kind of working in the media realms can be as an academic. And I'd always say never frown upon it, you know, frown away from it. You just should, yeah, do as much as you can in that realm, and especially to combat what we're up against now with kind of fake news and miscommunication
Yeah.
and stuff. So it's important to do. Definitely. But yeah, it's been really
Absolutely.
great to chat with the two of you. And yeah, I hope you've got plenty out of this as well. And I look forward to seeing this shared in the near future.
Well, there you go, everyone. There is the long requested one. Aaron has been working on this one in the background for a while, making sure, like say, that he'd honed all those questions how you wanted. But yes, massive thank you, Dean, for coming on. And we'll be watching you in the future and seeing what you get up to, and no doubt probably reporting about it on the podcast.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, massive thank you.
All right, fantastic stuff.
So that was another wonderful exploration of the natural world there. I hope you enjoyed it. We enjoyed it, and we enjoyed making it. In fact, if you like it more than that, why not become one of our Patreons? Because our Patreons get these videos a month early. So if you want to see them before everyone else, why not join our Patreon to enjoy them, well, early? Aaron, anything you want to say on that as well?
Enjoy them early. Get the Patreon.
Oh, there you go. Well, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time here in the Natural History Cupboard. Bye.
Cheerio.